All right, hi everyone. My name is Sawyer. I'm here to talk about abuse. And I want to start with a few announcements. First of all, this is not a fun talk. I know usually when I give talks, I run up on stage, I point at things, I jump around, I look like a rabid monkey on meth. Unfortunately, this one is not like that. I will be speaking loudly. I do not know how to do it differently, but it is not a happy talk. Additionally, I will not be naming people. I know some people have asked me, some people assume that I would do this, and I am quoting from people verbatim, but I will not be naming people. There are two reasons for this. The first one is probably more important. I don't want to vilify anyone, and I don't want to create targets of other people. There is a personal reason as well, which is I believe, at least I want to believe, that people are more than the bad things they do, more than the mistakes they make. And I believe a lot of these people are like that too. And putting them only with this in context removes the context of who they are and everything else that they've done. I want to believe that because I also make mistakes. There's a talk that I'm giving later that is filled with my mistakes. There are many. So I will also not be naming anyone. And lastly, and I'm sorry I have to do this, I do need to provide a warning. The topic is not easy. There is some sexual language that I have tried to censor, but it didn't really help. And if this is something that is difficult for you to hear, it is difficult for you to watch. I understand it. You have my apologies. And if you're staying, I want to prepare you a little bit. Okay, so I'll start with who I am and a bit more relevant to this talk specifically. So I was the pumpkin for several years. That includes being the person who eventually signs off on which features go into the language, maybe even what they look like, the fixes, prioritizing which versions they will have, and which versions those fixes will come in, doing some of the releases, organizing all of the dev releases. There are grants that the Perl Foundation provides. There are two types of grants. One is for anyone, and another one is specifically for the core maintenance. Those grants are for two people who work on core for pay. The pumpkin had to review those grants and approve them every time, and their reports as well. And I was also in charge of the security list. Lucky for me, I was able to find someone way better at this called JD, who took care of the security list for a while. I was also a member of the Perl Steering Committee, which is when the pumpkin role was replaced with a committee. I was the first round in the steering committee. I was also a grant committee member for the Perl Foundation for the other type of grant, which was anyone in this room who would like to do some work on Perl can submit a grant. Here's how much money I want to get. Here's the work that I'm going to do. And then this goes to a committee, the grant committee, and the grants committee decides whether you can have it or not, what conditions, different questions, reach out to the public. There's a lot of process behind it. And that's also something that I did. I was the project lead for Dancer and Dancer 2. The Dancer community has a very special place in my heart. And CPAN reports that I have 57 distributions, some of which you might be using, but Dancer and Dancer 2 specifically have a special place. And I will be mentioning them in this talk as well, so you would understand why. So I've also written some distributions. I'm a conference speaker, not just at Perl conferences, also at non-Perl conferences where I tend to talk about Perl, whether it's the keynote or that I had a lot of, I had the absolute honor to give a few times, or just giving talks. I also helped organize conferences, 2 conferences and 2 Perlmonger groups, the Tel Aviv PM in Israel and the Amsterdam XPM, not X for me, but X for expats. So it was all the expats from Amsterdam. We had a group. I also provided courses. If you came to a Perl conference in the last years, you probably have seen that there was a Dancer conference that was a set thing. And this was either for free or for a minimal sum. All of this was a contribution fully to the Perl Foundation. So if you came and you attended, and even if you paid that any sum of money, you should know 100% of it went to TPF to pay for conferences and stuff like that. And TPF is also working with different programs like Outreachy, previously known as the Outreach Program for Women, and Google Summer of Code, where people get paid to work on stuff. And through TPF, people can work on Perl stuff, but they need to have mentors. I was a mentor in both. Outreachy changed its name from Outreach Program for Women. They took on more underrepresented groups and minorities. And lastly, and this might be relevant to some people here more than others, I worked at a company that was the biggest sponsor for the Perl Foundation, and I was the person who facilitated, promoted, and approved, and kind of went through all the chains to get that sponsorship going. So, why am I giving this talk? There's a very simple reason, and it is that from this list, I'm doing 0. And this talk is why. So I'm going to start with defining abuse. Cambridge Dictionary defines abuse as to treat a person or an animal badly or cruelly, and abusive behavior using physical violence or emotional cruelty. Now, there are a lot of different types of abuse. It could be domestic, it could be sexual, it could be physical, verbal, emotional. I'm going to focus on emotional and verbal. There is so much to talk about this. There are so many better people to talk about this, but you're stuck with me today, and I'm going to focus on those because that's the stuff that I have more personal familiarity with and experience. There are 3 types of abuses that I want to focus on. The first one is unintentional. Unintentional abuse is by people who there's something that they regret, something they feel bad about, something they often apologize for later. They don't want to do it, or they can't control themselves doing it, but they definitely feel regret. Maybe they apologize, maybe they don't, but they definitely feel that regret. They wish they hadn't. I'm going to give an example. This is a real example. I was in a forum, someone came in, they wrote some code, they wanted feedback on it. Has anyone ever done this? Right? You get feedback on your code, right? That's great. So you're looking to hear, not, this is amazing. You're looking, because obviously the people you ask for feedback, they could probably do this because they're giving you feedback on it. What you're looking for is, how could I make this better? And someone told them, this is effing stupid. Right. Now, I reached out to this person and he said, look, you can't talk to people this way. And he said, no, I was just being direct. So let's talk about directness. This is one of my favorite topics when it comes to communication in tech. I came from Israel, I moved to the Netherlands. When I moved to the Netherlands, people told me, you should know Dutch people are direct. You know this. I'm pointing at a direct person who was asked the question yesterday and he started with, no. And then after a few seconds, he explained. So when I asked, what does that mean, being direct? They told me, well, if you're talking to a Dutch person and they think you're wrong, they might say, you are wrong. And I was like, wow, that's really great. Because in Israel, we tend to kind of mix them together. But they were like, no, if they think that there's a better way, they will say, there is a better way. It was like, well, that's actually really amazing. Dutch people, in general, I don't want to take too broad of a stroke on this, but Dutch people tend to just not care about all the things around it. They get straight to the core, exactly what they want to tell you. They don't care what it sounds like, but they're not offensive. They are direct. It took me time to understand why people warn about this when you move to the Netherlands, because some cultures, it is difficult to hear something straight on. You kind of go around and around, as someone once explained, until you reach the exact point. I imagine in North America, you might have people with a similar culture. But there is something very interesting about being direct in the fact that it might be difficult to get, but it is not offensive. The problem is that we oftentimes conflate those two in tech. So what we are is offensive, and what we hide behind is being direct. So what I'm saying is, it is effing stupid. And what I'm hiding behind is, I'm just being direct. The problem is that direct is to get to the point. Effing stupid is not the point. You cannot unstupidify it. That's not a characteristic that you can adjust, right? If you're a photographer and you come to me and seek feedback, which you shouldn't, I don't know anything about it. And my feedback is, well, this is dumb. You can't de-dumb that. I'm not talking about perspective and lighting and exposure. I'm just saying it's dumb. That's not something you can adjust. There is no camera setting for it, right? So it's really important to understand there's a difference between those. So I reached out to this person and I said, you cannot say that. And what they said was, okay, the problem is that it is slow. And I didn't know how to express it. And I said, I got you covered, say it slow. And he said, well, that wasn't enough. That's good, but it's not enough. Also, it had a bug in it. And I said, I know it, I got you, we can do this. It also has a bug. But then he said, the problem really was that as much as I would have loved to gone into it, I had to leave the house and I could not continue the conversation. I just wanted to say there are some issues with it. And I said, you know what? We might be able to do something about it. You could say, I see problems with it. I do not have the time to explain them right now. This seems like a joke. It is not a joke. This is actually a very important message to tell people sometimes. I do have criticism to give you. I just can't do it right now. That's actually helpful. It means that they have something to work on. It shows that you respect them enough and that you might be able to do it later. So they're now expecting it. That's great. You've primed them to actually have a conversation about it. So this is one person who a lot of people consider an intentional abuser. I don't think that way. We can differ and it's fine. I think this person is unintentional. They do it because whether they have poor self-control or some anger issues. I don't want to try and diagnose because I can't. But I do think this is someone with enough support from the community, they would be able to change that. But that leads us to intentional abuse. Intentional abuse is I intend to inflict this harm and I am okay with you experiencing it, or I want you to experience it. I'm going to give an example. It is verbatim. I got it from my inbox and I apologize in advance for you having to read it. I censored that word. It is not originally censored. And if you're thinking, oh, I could get that email and I'd be fine with it. This is an email in a thread. There were additional emails from the author with stronger language. I just remember this one very vividly. I cannot tell you why this person picked a homoerotic, pornographic scenario in their colorful email. But what I can tell you is that they wanted me to be very uncomfortable. If you read this and you were kind of grossed out, that's what this person wanted. They wanted me to feel grossed out. They wanted me to feel unsafe, uncomfortable, unhappy. It wasn't uncomfortable because it's homoerotic. It was uncomfortable because it was erotic. There is no reason for me to think of anything sexual when we are talking about function parameters. The person wanted to unsettle me. I can tell you what I responded. I sincerely suggest seeking help regarding your behavior and whatever is leading you to behave this way towards people. That felt really good to say. But in retrospect, which is kind of the theme that I have in this conference, that was condescending, and that was patronizing. It was bad. The person was really upset. I do agree they started really upset, but they got even more upset, and I definitely understand why they got upset at this. This was not okay behavior. I thought I'm being direct. But what I was patronizing and condescending. I can also say, did not help. That was kind of like putting out a fire with like a bucket of gasoline. The entire place burned down. It was bad. Okay. The third type of abuse is promoting and encouraging from the sidelines. So when you see someone being abusive and then someone else responding with anything that encourages it, anything that justifies it, anything that promotes that to continue. This is a third kind. I believe it's almost or as bad as abusing itself because you're perpetuating this from happening. Good. This is a straight quote. I'm going to give you the scenario. There was a distribution, very important distribution, that someone who was taking care of it had to step away. He gave it to someone else to take care of. That person made some changes. And not everyone agreed with those changes. I'm not going to go into what the changes were and whether they were right and the way they were carried out was right. That doesn't matter. The part that was interesting is the person, because of making those changes, received a lot of abuse. They were berated and they were degraded online and people talked really nasty about them. People treated them badly. And I talked to someone and he said, I think that if this continues, he will not take care of the distribution anymore, which is a shame because he is the sole maintainer of this distribution. No one else is doing it. Everyone's giving him crap for it, but he's the only one. This is the response. Verbatim, word for word, just good. The explanation behind it was, I think that if he keeps getting abused, he will stop. That's what I'm hoping will happen. So I hope this continues. I hope he suffers it. I hope it makes him leave. Because I don't like the way he's handling the distribution. All of these different types, from intentional, unintentional, encouraging, or supporting, they're all types of broken stairs. The broken stair concept came from the BDSM community, where someone wrote an article talking about abusers or assaulters and saying that they're kind of like broken stairs in your house. You know, people come in and you keep avoiding that stair. No one fixes it. People step above it. People walk around it. And if you're not in the house, someone's there, someone comes in, you warn them and you say, hey, there's a broken stair. Be very careful. Do not step on it. But no one will fix it. And these are these people. And they exist in every community. These are people that we all avoid, that we all tell each other, and we all try to manage around. Every community has them. I believe the tech community tends to have more of them. And unfortunately, Perl is a tech community. It does have them as well. I'm going to try and prove it. We're going to do a small experiment. I'm going to count to 10. If you want, you could close your eyes, and I want you to try to think of how many people do you know, not necessarily personally, but people that you could name that you believe are broken stairs in our community. Okay? So if you want, you can close your eyes now. I'm going to count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can open your eyes. If you were able to come up with at least one person, raise your hand. All right, great. If you were able to come up with, say, 3 people, keep your hand up. If you're able to come up with 6 or more, my hand is up because I was able to come up with 6 in 3 seconds. I have not counted to 10 for me. This exists. I also think that a lot of people, when they abuse or when they see abuse and don't do much about it, they're not thinking of what actually happens to the person. They might be thinking about however they feel at that point in time. They might be watching a show. They might be saying, oh, that's a meltdown and it's terrible. But they're not really aware of what could happen to the person experiencing this. And these go way beyond that one experience or that one chain of experiences. This will carry on with them in their life, possibly forever. Chronic mental health issues like anxiety, depression, complex PTSD, disrupted sense of self and identity issues, chronic physical health problems due to prolonged stress, interpersonal difficulties, challenges with intimacy, having a hard time with relationships, negative self-image and self-worth, difficulty setting boundaries and asserting oneself, feeling unsafe and at risk, and lastly, self-harm. I want to give you an example for one of those. At some point in time, while I was pumpking, someone sent a communication to a person of some authority. What they wanted is for me to be fired. Let's put aside for a moment that this person was not in that kind of authority, and that the pumpkin is not really a fireable position, and that the core are the only ones who could actually discuss what they want with the pumpkin because it's someone from core that the core nominated to just coordinate the stuff in core and make some decisions. But what this person had in his email, which would have been funny, included a threat. And the threat was that if I was not fired, there would be, to quote, a war. There were images of good and evil battling it out like a comic book. It was, if not a threat, funny, but a threat. I could have played it off, which is what I did originally. But then it came to a conference. Not this conference, but a conference. And that person was at the conference with a big knife. Now, put yourself in these shoes. You are at a conference. There is a person with a big knife who had described you as someone that if you still hold your position, there will be a war of epic proportions with this comic book delusion where you are the main villain. How safe do you feel? Do you go outside with other people to hang out? Are you worried about returning alone? Are you worried that they're staying at the same hotel as you? Maybe they know which floor you're on or accompany you on the elevator. Maybe they ask reception which room you're in. Maybe you're worried about going to the bathroom because you might find yourself alone with this person. You don't know. And this is what you experience. That is one experience I had of many. Another thing that I want to talk about is the impact to the community. A lot of people, when they think of abuse, or when they see it, or when they do it, they don't really think about the person, how they're being hurt. And maybe I've shared that list, and I can tell you that I experienced several of these. I've had relationships decimate, I've suffered anxiety, prolonged stress, depression, I felt unsafe. They're a big chunk of this list. I know that some people are looking at this and are either thinking, I don't care, or I'm happy that this happened. But to those people, or to the people who just don't really seem to understand the gravity of this, they don't care too much about it, I do want to talk about a little bit the impact to the community. I'm going to talk about two examples that are near and dear to me. One such example is Sage Sharp. Sage Sharp was a Linux developer. When USB 3 came out, it was really good. 10 times faster, better power consumption, awesome thing. The support for Linux was before any other operating system. If you are anywhere in this world, you have Linux running around you if it's not on your laptop. It'll be your TV, or it'll be your router, it'll be in your car, whatever it is. And Linux was the first one to have USB 3 support. Not Windows, not Mac. And that's because of Sage. The Linux mailing list, however, is known for berating people. Known for abusing and humiliating publicly, swearing, cursing, very weird, strange ways to insult. It's just a very odd thing. And we all kind of either laugh about it and say, yeah, that's kind of bad. Sage decided they cannot see this abuse anymore of their colleagues. And I say they because Sage is non-binary. This prompted Sage to quit. That meant that if you are in this world, you're probably using Linux in some way, form, or another. And that Linux is not going to be as good as it could be. We all suffered from this. Because Sage was a brilliant developer. And we lost them. They will not work on the Linux kernel again. I'm going to give another example, a bit closer to home. I don't know how many people here knew Rafael. Rafael Garcia Suarez, or RGS, was the pumpkin for 510. And not everyone agrees with what happened in 510, what went in, how it worked. But I think it is important to know a little bit about it. I can talk a lot about what I experienced, but the work that I had as pumpkin was actually very reduced from the work at that time. After Rafael and Dave Mitchell, we had Jesse Vincent, we had Ricardo Cygnus, myself. The three of us, Jesse and Ricardo and myself, we would make a lot of decisions and we might even review some patches. But to be fair, when Dave Mitchell submits a patch, my ability to review his C code is very limited. And I am a C developer originally, and I barely understand. The C in Perl is very, very good and also uses a lot of tricks to make Perl really fast and very flexible. But at the time when Rafael was the pumpkin had to review every patch. They had to approve everything. They had to write a lot of stuff themselves. So if there was an idea for something, it might have been the pumpkin who implemented it. Because you should remember, one of the pumpkins was Larry, right? So that was a much different level of responsibility. And the way Rafael was treated caused him to eventually quit. Not the pumpkin role, not the Perl core, not the Perl community, not his work on Perl, but all of it. If you haven't met Rafael, I got to work with him a little bit. I would say for 8 years. Rafael is by far one of the most brilliant people I have ever worked with. He is also one of the kindest and sweetest people I've met. He is very thoughtful. He is very sharp. And he's probably very uncomfortable that I'm talking about him this way. But he was willing for me to put his name on it, so that's what you got to deal with. And we lost this person. Fully. I imagine some of you can name other people that we do not have in the community anymore for a similar reason. Or people you could name that you haven't seen in a while and you don't know why. And this is the reason. All right, moving on. There are a few ways in which we accept or let abuse happen. Things that we tell ourselves or other people. The common one that I like is, it's not that bad, or it's fake. Many times this comes in the form of, I would have dealt with it just fine. So maybe you read the email that I showed and you said, oh, I would totally be fine with this really bizarre language this person wrote me. I would be totally fine. Maybe even slightly, somewhat secretly delighted to get this special attention from this person who crafted such an innovative way to make me uncomfortable. But to me, this is a form of works on my laptop. So how many people here, you've had an issue in production and the developer says, well, on my laptop, it worked. So it's fine. But here's the thing. All of those ways are ways to ignore the damage or the way it doesn't work somewhere else. It's a way to delegitimize someone else's experience, right? You don't get to decide what is the bar for this not being okay. I get to decide it for me. You get to decide it for you. Maybe you would be fine with a certain type of abuse. Maybe you brush it off very easily. I am happy that you have that constitution. That's great. Maybe I don't. Maybe I had it and it was worn off. Works on my laptop doesn't work because your laptop isn't production. I don't know how many times I have to tell developers this. Your laptop is not production. I don't care that it works on your laptop. On production, it's failing. And in this way, the fact that for you it's okay, for me it isn't. I am failing. Another thing people say is they deserved it. I am not happy with them. I'm upset with them. They angered people. They deserved it. No one deserves it. I'm going to pause for a second and repeat this because it's worthwhile keeping this in mind for a moment. No one deserves this. It doesn't matter what they've done. But then there's the other one that is a bit more of an upgrade from they deserved it. Maybe they didn't deserve it, but it was better for the project. The project is better for it. I disagree. Just like losing Sage and just like losing Raphael and a host of other people, projects turn out better for having fewer people in it. And if it's still a problem for you, at most, just fork it. It's open source. For crying out loud, fork it and fork off. Just enough. I'm really trying not to swear nowadays. I didn't do anything wrong. I like this one. This is not when you are watching from the side, but when you're encouraging, but you didn't do it yourself. So I egged the person on, but I wasn't the one who did it. I didn't say anything to the person. But if you're encouraging, it's just as bad. You have just as much responsibility, if not more so, because it might have died out if you were to shut up, but you don't. And I suffered worse. I will tell you hands down, whatever I suffered, I believe a lot of people have suffered worse. In the positions that I've had, a lot of people have suffered worse. In the countries where I lived, and in the cities where I lived, in the companies where I worked, in the groups that I was in every place, there's always someone who suffered worse. It is not a competition. We're not trying to set the bar at the one who has the worst experience. All right. There are 3 statements I want to make. I want you to keep this in mind. First one is no one owes you all of their time. One of the things that happens when you have any kind of public role is that people assume that because you have it, and maybe you do owe people some time, they owe you all of your time. If you go on the bus and you want to talk to the bus driver for one moment to ask a question, it makes sense for them to answer about the line, where it's going, where the bus is stopping, or where it's not stopping. But you will not be able to monopolize the bus driver's time. They have other things they're doing. No one owes you all of their attention. And no one owes you their well-being. I had a communication that is public where the thread kept going. And one person said A, and I said B, and then they said A, and I said, yes, but B. And then they said, no, but A. And I said, I hear you, I understand you, but B. That is the decision. No, C, but A. And it didn't change, and it just kept going. And in this thread, my last response was, I need to go have dinner now. Like, I don't have the time for this. I cannot do this all day long. But they could. Because they could, it meant I have to. Because I owe them all my time. I owe them all of my attention. And when I'm not doing well, people feel like it's still my problem because I owe them my well-being. So, this leads us to how to deal with it, which to me was probably one of the most difficult things to talk about for this because I wasn't sure how to deal with it. But I have a few ideas. First, you need to have a code of conduct. Conference has one. The Perl Core has one. Many communities within Perl have one. I don't think everyone has them. So I think that's definitely a beginning. However, it needs to be encompassing. And what I mean by encompassing is that it needs to include the different ways in which people could do harm to one another in the community. Now, people might ask, where is the bar? How far should we go? Well, we're not talking about someone stepped on my shoe hill and then my foot came off and it's very uncomfortable and I had to put my shoe back on. Like, we're not talking about that, right? We're talking about abuse, harassment. So, a lot of the policies have stuff like, don't be a jerk. And like, yeah, don't be a jerk, but like, that's not enough. This reminds me of the Perl community. Because in the Perl community, we have a policy that includes a lot of stuff. Because there are a lot of different ways. And the way we did it is that people in the community built it. And people in the community are versatile enough and have a wide-ranging set of experiences, so they're able to draw from it in order to indicate what kind of things they do not want to see happen. And a big thanks to Ruth for helping with this. She's a big part of the community, and she helped build that policy the dancer has. It is important to put things like sexual harassment, trans-exclusionary. There's a lot of these different things that are really important to put in there. Screaming at someone is not okay. Berating them is not okay. Publicly humiliating them is not okay. And the dancer policy actually includes a long list of those things. It could be longer, but it is definitely more than don't be a jerk. And I think we should be encompassing. I think people don't understand how important it is. The way I could express it is that when you are writing a policy, you're doing two things. You're telling one person, this is behavior that I will not tolerate from you. You're also telling another person, this is behavior that I will not tolerate someone doing to you. When you indicate more types, you are accepting and recognizing and sharing that you understand their experience, that you understand what they are going through, that you understand the types of things they are worried about. If I go to a conference and I'm concerned about someone carrying a big knife, don't be a jerk doesn't cover it. I will not feel safe. For the ProConf, you should know there is a clause that says you may not bring any form of weapon. It is important. You need to tell people that you do see them and what they might experience, and you recognize it and you care about it. Next, it needs to be enforced. Sounds given, it isn't. A lot of the communities that we have, even in Perl, we don't enforce it or we don't enforce it well. And that's a problem. Because if you're not going to enforce it, it's worse than not having it. Because not having it is a gray zone. Having it and not enforcing it basically means you're unsafe. Because not having it is like, well, we'll see. But not enforcing it, it says, we have seen. And it's going to be a no. After you enforce it, you do need to also enforce it across all of the different forms in which people will be. This is one of the biggest challenges, in my opinion, for enforcing a policy in the Perl community. That's because the Perl community is split across multiple smaller communities. Someone could go on core and be a jerk, and maybe they get banned, maybe temporarily, maybe forever, maybe they get told off, but they can go to Toolchain and they can be whoever they want to be there. Or maybe they went to Toolchain, and in Toolchain they were told, you will not behave this way. But what they then do is go to the conference. And that means that for you, you're not actually safe from that person in any way, shape, or regard. For the dancer community, we have stipulated very clearly that any forum of the dancer community, the policy applies. IRC, mailing list, dancer conf, core summit, it did not matter. Any place that you go to as a dancer community member, the policy is enforced fully. I also think that this enforcement should be, when applicable, when possible, be done with the aggrieved party. They might have a position about it. Sometimes the policy says, this is what's going to happen if you do this. But sometimes there's wiggle room. A lot of time there is wiggle room. There's room to decide what could be done. I think the aggrieved party should be consulted. And I think this was, for me, probably the biggest thing that I eventually came up with, because I was also drawing again from the dancer community. I love the dancer community very much. Very, very, very much. In the last 2 years, the things that I actually worked on, even if slightly, were still the dancer community stuff. When I joined Dancer, Sucria was the person in charge. Alexis Sucria, he wrote both 1 and 2, and he maintained the community. He had this sentence that he would tell the core developers, and then he would tell everyone else. He said, when I make a decision about something, whether it's a fix or a feature, whatever it is, I've made a decision, but we can always talk about it. Even if it's been months, even if it's been years, you disagree with it, you want to talk about it, my door is open. He wanted us to bring new arguments, right? It wasn't just like, I'm just going to repeat the same thing over and over, but let me try to convince you of my opinion in a different way. And he wanted you to be respectful, but he would always listen. Always. He was always happy to open topics again, which is one of the things that we dread and dislike so much. You know, we try to put pen to paper to acknowledge something and say, that's it, we've made a decision, enough. He would always say, yeah, but if you want to talk about it, we can, which seems like the biggest open door to continuing an endless debate. But we didn't have those endless debates. Very rarely. What it meant to us is that we were safe in discussing things. And that we should feel comfortable to talk about things. It prompted us to discuss respectfully. And when someone joined the community, they were always treated with warmth. They were always treated with respect, with kindness. Because we wanted people to understand this is how we want you to behave to others. Not don't do A, B, and C, which we have. But what we had more than that is here's what you should do. Here's how you should behave. You should treat others with respect, with kindness, with care, with love, with friendliness. And that's something that every community member shares with other community members. It is amazing. I've never had a bad experience at any dancer conference, event, communication. It doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that it never happened. I could have my blind spots. People could have had experiences that I did not. And it doesn't mean that it will never happen. But it would be very difficult to find those cases. Because it's just so common for us to treat other people with love. Another community that did this right is Rust. It's not that Rust is perfect as a community, but boy, they went a long way in order to promote behavior that they want to see. No one talks about Rust's community in the sense of they have a really long policy. Like, no. They talk about Rust as they have how you should behave. That's something that we don't do. You go on core and you should behave nicely. But maybe you don't, and then you have a policy for don't do that. But when you join core, no one goes like, look, here's like a good way to interact. You don't see each other always treating with absolute respect. It's very difficult. The last thing that I want to say is that communities, just like this one, they are a labor of love. We do this because We like it, we love each other. Perl has been in my bones for more than 15 years. I've worked with as many people as I could. I have an unbelievable amount of respect and love for a lot of the people in it, for a really big number of people in it. And I remember when someone described me meeting someone for the first time like a crush, because that's the feeling I have with so many of the people here. But abuse has this tendency of scraping that away, tearing it apart. And it can do that. And it did that to me. And this is why I left. The one thing that I want to leave you with is that communities are a labor of love. And they shouldn't let anyone take that away from you. Thank you. I don't think we have time for questions. We do? So we have time for questions. So let's try a few. 10 minutes. Whew. All right. Okay. So you can ask the question, but you can also take your time asking it. So if it has like multiple clauses, go for it.
I assume there's no answer. I hope there's no answer, but the question is important. What's going to take to get back?
What's going to get me back? That is very sweet. I honestly don't know where I'm at. I spoke to Peter before, and he said, so what happens next year? And I don't know. Before I came here, I remember being on the plane here and thinking, yeah, this will be the last time I get to see a lot of these people. This is why I took the picture at the beginning. This would be that's what it was. Being here is very different though. There's a certain love that I feel here all the time. When I'm at a talk, when I enter a room, when I see other people entering, when we walk around, when we see each other over breakfast, there's this really strong sense of love. And I stepped away from it for a long time, but I don't know if I could keep that up. I might not. Also, we had a impromptu BOF of dancer corps, and that was amazing because I love just everyone in dancer. And I don't think I'm ready to step away from that. I don't do Perl nowadays, but on dancer I worked for years without using it. So who knows? I don't have an answer. I'm sorry.
Sawyer, your talk
Yes.
discusses specific bad characters. What are your experiences with either anonymous abuse or throwaway account abuse, or that just isn't seen much?
Right. That's a really good point. So Bulk is asking, what about anonymous abuse, throwaway accounts, things you can't really connect to people directly, right? I think it's possibly worse because you don't even have a person to point to say, look, what you're doing is wrong. And maybe you mean it, maybe you don't mean it, but let's talk about it, and this needs to end one way or another. Throwaway accounts are a really good way and a very cowardly way to maintain harm. At the same time, I respect anonymity very much. I have to say, full disclosure, X is not my legal last name. So I definitely accept anonymity, but if it's meant to be abusive, it's probably much worse. And I think the only way to deal with it is to keep moderating for good behavior and to support each other. More questions? Yes?
So, I've been before observer of beauty for 20 years plus now, and I have seen a lot of these public fights. It's all been a periphery, so I don't know a lot of details, but one thing that I've come away with, and maybe others who probably the majority of people, is there's these, what ends up, what it seems like it's happening is there are these conflicts, whatever they are, and then people who can contribute, or people who contribute technically to the project are no longer here for one reason or another. And now we find ourselves in a situation, at least this is my perception, that we're lacking hard technical talent, and just time and people to do the things that we want to do with Perl. So, what are your thoughts on how do you square all the people that we've lost, whether they were bad actors or victims? And is there any chance of any kind of reconciliation or coming to a point in the community where we can get some of these people back?
Right.
And focus on the life?
Right. So how do we get people back, and how do we reconciliate? I don't have an easy answer for it. There's one thing I learned from the hurt that I have done to others. The one thing that I've learned, and it's probably the hardest thing for me to think about, because I think about it often, is that when you hurt someone, it doesn't matter whether you apologize or made it right. The way you hurt them is still there. You still hurt them. That is not going away. I still think of people that I've hurt in my life who are still in my life and still care about me very much. And I still think of the times that I hurt them, because it's not actually going away. And you might have apologized, and they might have accepted your apology and they said it's fine. You might have dealt with it, but they still experience that pain that you caused them. I think a lot of it is for people who are hurt to process this. A lot of it is to still take responsibility for the harm. Time can heal some wounds for some people, and there are people who return to the community, and that we're very lucky that they returned. And there are people that we lost, and they will be lost forever. And there are people that they're sticking around, and we hope that they return. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer. Yeah.
So, when my children were in school, they got this one bit of advice that said, if you see somebody suffering self-abuse, you can support them just by going and standing near them. You don't have to be very active, but you can just give them support by simply putting your body where they can feel the support.
Mm.
Right? So you're not even putting yourself out there very much.
Yeah.
Is there a way to do that online?
So how that's really beautiful. When someone going through abuse and you can or some form, and you stand next to them and your body is physically there to support. What do you do online? And that's, so reaching out to people directly is a big thing. I got a text this morning from someone who we had a lot that went through with us. And he sent me a text this morning saying, good luck. And that was really big for me. That was really, really big for me. I think reaching out directly is big. And I think responding publicly with whatever form of unhappiness or discomfort that you have experienced that you want to be made public, both to the person who said something and both to the person who received that, I think is also big. And we don't do much of it. We often let other people moderate, but we don't really respond with hey, don't do that. But I think that's bigger than people think, because in a sense, you're putting yourself on the stage. So if you're on any kind of mailing list and someone says something nasty and you respond with, hey, no, not cool. It doesn't matter how long your email was. You put yourself on the stage now. That is massive. That is way bigger than you think. So I would say, do that, and you can reach out personally, and that means a lot to people. All right, last question? Go for it. Yes?
So what I actually want to do is point out that is very helpful, and we actually had access to today because of someone who did that for me. So when I took over the testing tools, it was given to me by Schwein. There were a few people in the community who were from my senior community and went to Perl tool chain from in Berlin for the first time and continued there. People who were saying that I was going to
I'm not going to repeat it for the microphone, and I think it is a beautiful way to end it. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.